All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the April Board of Estimate and Taxation meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and have a pledge allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome, welcome. I'd like to first ask the board for a little leniency. I did modify the agenda for this evening to go over an item which I labeled as a review of the new Lebanon conditions. During the budget process, we had lots of discussion. I happened to be the liaison on the Board of Ed. I made several of the Board of Ed meetings while they were contemplating this. And as you know, and I'll make some comments later, we attended the RTM meetings this month for the budget, and obviously this is a budget item. And I thought it was, taking some suggestions from some of our members, especially the budget committee meetings, this subject to release is sort of different than ones that at least I've seen in my time on the finance board. And I thought it would be worthwhile to start a series of meetings. I'm sure we're not going to answer everything tonight, but get ourselves in a position where we understood the condition, what the next steps were, what our exposure was on any parts of the project, and where we go and how things move along. And our first selectman got Ms. O'Neill and I pretty good, sent us the code about how the building committee, and I'll be asking later on to add an item to our agenda for the position of that building committee. So with that said, I've seen some email traffic and some dialogue, and I would say if Ben, if you want to take it over to Salvo, and then what I was planning on doing is our two budget committee members, Ms. Kieran and Ms. Tarkington, have sort of been the lead on this. It's your choice. I can hand it there, or if you wanted to start with sort of your perspective of the condition. And
I'll certainly start. I appreciate the heads up that this won't be a 7-hour meeting.
6 hours?
Maybe 6 hours. In front of you have a 3-page document with a calendar. It's labeled draft. The draft is important because this will change, but it's our administration's view of the next 3 months necessary in order to, A, meet the conditions, to get access to the funds, because without the money, we can't do anything further on the project, but also to deal with the conditions, particularly condition 1.
pick it up. The wizard says you need the microphone.
Is it on now?
Yes, I think it's coming through.
No, it sounds like it's not. Sometimes it takes a moment.
Yeah, now you're on.
How about now?
Yeah,
There you go.
So let me restart very quickly. The calendar in front of you is their administration's view on the next 3 months in order to meet the conditions that they place on the funds by the BET, but also in order to meet the conditions, if you will, that the state of Connecticut requires for the state grant that this project is eligible for. I won't go line by line on this document because some of them are just placeholders for we understood where either the BET or the Board of Ed has meetings. But the one item on the April date is just that we're planning to present to the Board of Selectmen at their April 30th meeting to start the process of the Scheme C, which is the approved educational specifications the Board of Ed passed in January for the land use process, just to start that process, and then hopefully there's state grants or require resolutions. Those resolutions will be before the Board of Selectmen as well. At the same time, they're dealing with the building committee. We thought it would be just a nice package rather than do things a one-off, just one package of both the building committee plus the resolutions. The resolutions are important because the state requires the resolutions to be passed by the legislative body, and the legislative body, as we all know here, is the RTM, so we need to get that through, and it needs to be passed prior to June 30th in order to get it into the cycle. So backdating the June 30th, it pretty much forces us into this this calendar of events. The back up the following month, we talked about the following week on the same April 15th here, we've talked about the environmental testing. Our consultants received the additional testing that we've done for the ball field. As you recall, we've done 2 press releases. The first release was about what we found in the environmental phase 1. And then we did a second follow-up on what we found on the limited phase 2. And the limited phase 2 said that there was arsenic found in the ball fields. And then we've taken additional testing to further characterize that. And we anticipate having the report out on this Friday. But we have yet to see the report. Our consultant is currently looking at that, but that's what we're working towards. Again, I think this all feeds into the conditions, particularly as it relates to the environmental concerns that the BET has. After the Board of Selectmen has both the MI referral and the state resolutions, we will, if all goes well, as long as the RTM approves the funding requests and as long as the RTM approves the 3 resolutions that the state requires, we'll have enough of requirement in order to submit to the state by the June 30th date, no later than June 30th, so we can at least get in the queue for their process, and their process takes several months. We won't know until December, January of where we stand on the project from that respect. That's a very quick overview of the process. The last comment I'll make is we are anticipating on the June calendar to have, if we think, and I think this is a great opportunity to get all the questions on the table so we're prepared to ask for the release. We're anticipating being able to ask for a release of $1 million, which is both conditions 1 and 2. We would like to do that on the June 9th, and we're backdating that as well. That gives us, as you know, access to the funds July 1, so then we can begin the process of moving the project forward. But we do recognize that this project will not go forward unless we have access to the funds. And after, hopefully, the RTM approves the bonding resolution and the conditions are released, the project can move forward. This is a very quick overview, and we had a lot of involvement. I know 2 of your members have been on the committee over the summer. We had conversations in February. The conditions we've talked about. Certainly can answer any questions you have on the process or go from there.
Thank you. I would say right now I would ask Ms. Keir, Ms. Tarkington, the 2 lead members on the Budget Committee who helped us build a step-by-step sort of condition subject to release, whatever we choose to call it.
Ben, thanks for coming tonight, and thank you so much for this sort of open conversation to share information about this, so that we're really efficient about moving it forward. When Leslie and I worked on these conditions, we met with Wayne Fox and Katie DeLuca a number of times. As you all may recall, there were some questions about the interpretation of our charter and the MI process, which I think we resolved. But I just wanted to point out that was the subject of a series of our meetings initially. And then what we tried to do once we settled what the MI process was to track these releases to the various procedural steps that you've just summarized. But then embedded in the very first release are these 4 phrases that are basically 4 different informational requests. And the first one has to do with environmental, wetlands, and other testing or analysis conducted by the Board of Ed around the properties at New Leb. And I would say that was probably a personal concern of mine, and I wonder if I could just go through a couple of questions in that regard with you. And some of these may have to be answered by Wayne Fox, who could not be here, we understand, this evening, but we're supposed to keep a list for him, and we'll get our questions to him. But the first question would be, what is our exposure right now from a legal and regulatory perspective? Arsenic has been found on the ball field. Pesticides indicated in the Scheme C area. What is the town's obligation today?
I'll certainly defer to Wayne anytime you start the word legal or regulatory. I'll defer to the town attorney on that.
Right.
But as we understand it, we're working closely with the town's consultant, the same consultant that we use on the Hillside project, AECom. I believe it's the same consultant they're using on the Byron Pool issue as well. But AECom is the consultant we're engaging with on reviewing the data of the soil borings and lake. The last press release we did where we said that arsenic was found in field 2, their recommendation was further testing to have a better delineation of the problem in the field. And that's what we're doing now, and we will know, again, based on the calendar, if all goes well, we should release by Friday. I have no teaser to give you. I haven't seen the report either, but we'll know further on what the characterization of the field is and what the arsenic is, and then depending on what the results say, will then dictate further action. If any. The options are going to be remove, remediate. The options could also be there's sufficient ground coverage that the health and human risk factor has been mitigated, and that's one step. It could be turf management. These are all similar options that are being used right now as we speak at the high school Hillside project. But it would be premature for me to speak to any of that until we have the results. The pesticides that we mentioned, that you mentioned also, we mentioned in the press release on Scheme C. The results from the comments from AECom, our consultants, said at this time there's no further testing needed because of based on the depth of the area, and they said you get into that when you do when you further define the construction area, then you can make determination. But they felt at this time there was no further testing needed in the area.
Okay.
But that's the extent of my knowledge on where we currently are.
So we'll hear something publicly Friday. We'll talk to Wayne on the legal and regulatory questions. My other issue is why not do a full Phase 2 analysis right now? When you visited with us at the February Budget Committee meetings, we talked about this a little bit, and I asked the question, how much would it cost to just complete Phase 2? And Al Manelli also commented on that. And so I think it's about $25,000, and you and I have talked about this. And so it's something that we required for Central Fire Station. My point of view is I think it would be prudent to get complete Phase 2 testing done now that we're testing. I mean, typically that happens once you've got your A&E, but in this case it's happened before, and I think it should be completed. How long would it take to do that and get the analysis done?
I'll back data. I think we'll be able to, if we did further testing, it depends on the nature of the testing. And there is a difference between environmental testing and the geotechnical that's necessary for construction. I think that's premature to start that process, but just to do an environmental testing, generally you could, their logistics is they can get them scheduled in a week, results back in a couple weeks, and then it's once you get the raw data, it's the interpretation that takes longer. But the short of answer to that is by the end of May, we should be able to have additional information on what we found if we decided to do additional testing in Scheme C. I know we have talked about doing B and C, and the fiscal struggle you have is just we did a limited Phase 2, so we did about 8 soil borings across the campus, if you will, both New Lead proper, where Scheme C is, and the field, just to characterize the site. When there was a couple hits on the Scheme B with the arsenic, that then the data dictated further study, delineation of the area, which we're doing now. There was nothing. We did find pesticides, as we mentioned in Scheme C, but the consultant's recommendation was there was no further testing warranted because the data didn't present itself. But I understand to alleviate potential concern or hedge against uncertainty, and it wouldn't be $25,000 because $25,000 was both B and C. We could get a quote and deal with that on the district side of what it will take to, and we'd work with AECom, of course, on what is the appropriate environmental testing to do in order to have a greater understanding for Scheme C. We can certainly do that if that's what the BET would want and need for the release of the funds.
Okay. There are a number of other informational requests set forth in this first release, and I think I'll defer to my colleague Leslie Tarkenton, because I know number 2 was important to her. So thank you very much, Ben.
Thank you very much, and for everyone else who in the Board of Education and those on the feasibility study committee who worked hard in getting it to this step. And obviously, Mary Lee mentioned our process as we put together these conditions, but I would also like to add that John Wetmore was very much also involved with the process, together with Katie and her staff and Wayne Fox. As we looked at this condition, again, we have assumed that Scheme C is the selected scheme and have used that, but also to make sure that some of these other issues, is it mine?
Move your water bottle
My water bottle?
and your iPad.
No, my iPad? I don't think it's still, anyway, I have no more electronics up here, so, and my water bottle is gone. So, anyway, I think we try to also listen to all of our colleagues on the BET and obtain input from them. And there certainly was question about what their understanding was coming out of the feasibility committee, whether the specifications themselves were sufficiently detailed and consistent and took into some, everything into effect in terms of modern technology, the safety and security used across the board, and so forth. As you move forward here, you've now gone beyond what we expected to happen even before July 1st, because you're now talking about release of not only the first condition, but also the second condition without sort of a period to make sure that this goes through the selectmen and comes out with the approved MI. Is that your intent here now, Ben? Is that, or the BOE?
Would you like to use my microphone? Do you want to try that?
That's fine with me, if that's
Turn
better.
yours off. Turn yours off. Hey, come over here.
So I'm just going to slide over and use a better microphone.
You
So-
sit on my lap.
I believe as the schedule is proposed and as my understanding of the conditions, that the district, the Board of Ed, will be able to meet conditions 1 and 2. We're anticipating presenting to the Scheme C to the Board of Selectmen at the end of this month. Their process, as we know, is here at once and then on the second meeting. Their second meeting is May 14th, and then we believe if as long as the Board of Selectmen have enough information that we've given them and they feel confident to start the process, we believe then that meets condition 2. It's just but it does not start the process of us going to the land use approval boards. That, as we've gone through the process the last month or so about what is the MI process, that's debatable how much money that costs, but our understanding is in order to get it through the P&Z regulations and the like, and the studies that we will have to do, traffic, et cetera, we will need access to the $1 million, the 200 and the 800 put together. So, and as to streamline the process in order to collapse these two, we feel we can meet 1 and 2 and present the information. Of course, BET can certainly disagree with me on that when we present to the budget committee and say, well, we don't feel you met the conditions. But we feel that based on our understanding of it and the schedule we have presented, we can meet the conditions and keep moving the project forward. So we have access to at least $1 million to engage an architect for the design services with the building committee that would be formed in June as well.
And Ben, have you prepared the A2 survey that's needed for that first process of going through the Board of Selectmen? Is that the information that would be required in terms of surveys and?
We believe that
Or will have by that time,
whether or not that's a requirement of the Board of Selectmen, they'll have to make the determination if they have enough information from the approved educational specs, whether or not the scheme C, the schematics that we have as one concept of how you actualize the educational specs. I keep holding on this because this is what was approved. The Board of Selectmen will receive the educational specs, the scheme C, and the budget work that we've done on it. If they need further information, we'll then have to go back. But it's our understanding of the MI process. That level of work is what's required from the land use boards, not necessarily the Board of Selectmen. But that's the decision that they will make collectively.
Quite frankly, I thought we had spent quite a bit of time with Wayne Fox and others on that particular point, and we felt that in order to really understand and go through that first level of MI, that the A2 survey should be there, not necessarily T2 and all the details, but at least beginning to lay out on, so that I think the importance of this, Ben, is to understand the actual parcel so that we understand A, B, and C, are they the same parcel, the legal parameters, and those kind of issues, which I don't think that anyone has, confirmed to date. And so in our discussions with the law department, it was my understanding that this would be prudent, particularly as you go through the various soil testings to make sure we understand the parcels, the legal parameters, and whether, say, C is on the same parcel, whether B is on the same parcel as A and C. And I felt, it was my understanding that in these discussions it was felt prudent that at least the A2 survey for the selected site be completed. So, and again, I think some of these other issues, I think primarily the soil testing, is a critical point here, but also to make sure that the ed specs are sufficiently current, in sufficient detail, that the school you want to build is what you get. And, that when you begin looking at the Article 9 on school building committees, there's a very limited number of touch points that are required between the Board of Education and the building committee. And you want to make, obviously, as we talked about this, we want to make sure that, everything is sufficiently clear and in sufficient detail that the building committee can get a running, jump on this project and move ahead without any kind of hitches or being, forced to step back a step or two. And I can tell you, on the other building committee, we know a little bit about stepping back, but, we want this to go smoothly.
Absolutely, and I agree with you. I'll just make one comment about the ed specs. Is they were approved January of this calendar year. The work started on them the summer, July of last calendar year. I'm never going to say any document's perfect. You can never write a document by committee, and a committee is always going to have a different interpretation, but the document that the Board of Ed approved was vetted through numerous public hearings. The Board of Ed certainly had their say on this, the document. It is current to the current vision of a school. I think comments that I get from some people as well, because we recognize the DLE or the Digital Learning Project, the one-to-one device at the schools, and we still mention carts. Just because we're going to one-to-one does not mean that mobile carts is going away. The use will change, but we still reference that in the document. The security standards. It's implied that this is a safe school, and even to be eligible for state grant, you have to design it to their standard, and it's the same standard that we just went through with the help of the BET and the RTM a couple years ago after the Newtown incident, and enhance all of our facilities. That's the same standard that they're going to require for new construction. So although if you may say, well, it's not mentioned in the ed specs, the ed specs, it serves one purpose. It's to understand. It's for the state to understand the scope, scale, and magnitude of what you're trying to do locally. And they look at this and they say, okay, now we understand what you're trying to do. You need so many square foot, so many buildings. But then the building committee then has to take what the Board of Ed approved and try to, as you recognize with the MISAs, then make it a reality. And But the reality, though, has to be balanced with the fiscal issues, and that's where you start making trade-offs. Where we still making hitting the intent of the ed specs, and that's where you start making construction decisions. But I think the ed specs are current as we know it, and certainly somebody can, I'm sure, point out and say, well, what about this? What about that? But the further you get away from the ed specs, the more stale they will become. But these are relatively current.
Well, again, that's good to hear. And I think that, certainly over the next month or so, it sounds like the time is getting shorter and shorter here, where there are questions, I think Roland is going to keep track of these questions and will make sure that they're answered, whether it's by Wayne Fox or you. But I do, just to take, technology, I think that if, I would be interested to make sure that Phil Dunn is made sure that, where it mentions wireless access points in each room, whether that is really needed any longer, whether, centralized points. I mean, I think some of this guidance, you may talk about the state, but there's a big, separation between the state and our people locally who are going to take, many tens of millions of dollars to build a school. And starting off on the best foundation is only going to help all of us in the building committee, and we all want that. So I think, those are my comments. And thank you for the spot, Jeff.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay.
Before we get to the third.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Ben, for this calendar and some of the information. I look at the week of, or the 27th, and it talks about releasing RFP for design services. And my general question, just to see if we're all on the same page, is who does hire the architect? Who writes the RFP for design services? Is that the building committee, the Board of Ed, the town? Who really hires the architect and sees that whole process?
The
Charter requires it to the building committee.
The building committee makes a recommendation to the Board of Education for the hiring of the architect.
Okay.
I purposely put a question mark here. Was the only way to keep moving forward is to put an RFP out for the architect prior to the formation of the building committee, so I at least gain that lead time. And if all goes according to plan, I know best laid plans, but if all goes to plan, you could at least have the proposals from the architects waiting for the first day of business from the building committee once they're appointed. But
So I totally agree with that. I mean, those can run in parallel, and it's smart to get that going. I just wonder if it'd be, I mean, it seems like that, when the conditions were written, originally it talked about scheme C, and a number of people kind of questioned whether C was actually going to be that scheme or not, or whether there might be some other alternatives. And I know Mary Lee and Leslie wrestled with that and eventually kind of made it sound like the chosen scheme. I would only suggest when you write the RFP, there's enough flexibility as well as clarity when architects respond back that it might be Site C, brand new school. Maybe there's a slight chance it still might go back to the existing school renovation and new addition. And just so an architect who's thinking about applying for the job, presenting their proposals might clearly understand it could involve some renovation work if that were chosen down the road. Does that make sense to other people?
The question I have is if we're hearing the Board of Ed has made the decision for Scheme C, which I'd like to hear, why might it go to a different scheme?
I don't know, other than the ongoing testing. When it actually came to doing, I mean, Ben, you said you did not do the test for potential structural suitability.
Geotech. Okay.
So the geotech type stuff. So if they were to find certain issues with C, then maybe they have to consider something else. And I mean, I don't think that's too difficult for an architectural firm to say, okay, well, maybe, instead of a brand new school, it's going to have a combination of new and old. Just maybe make sure that's in the RFP so they understand what their hourly rate might be for some changes to the design.
Mr. Raymer?
First of all, as a parenthetical, I'll just mention that under Article 9, School Building Committee of our ordinances of the town, part of our charter, at Section 2-45, under the powers and duties of the Building Committee, it says, it includes as item number 1, the selection and employment of an architect, but in subsection B, it goes on to say, no architect shall be selected or employed without the prior approval of the Board of Education. So it's obviously a collaborative process. But that wasn't the reason that I wanted to speak, Mr. Chairman. I want to be sure that I'm fair with Mr. Branyan, that I'm fair with the Board of Ed, that there's a technical issue that feels important to me. I don't know necessarily that the other members of the board will feel the same way. I've spoken to some do, some don't, and I don't know particularly how that count breaks out. But it's not appropriate for me to raise technical issues with you in June. It's appropriate for me to raise technical issues with you in April so that you can anticipate the event. I did not participate in the writing of these conditions. They were done by a committee of 2 people, Mary Lee Kiernan and Leslie Tarkington. I think the job was well done. I certainly voted in favor of those conditions. I think they're well crafted. And in condition number 1A, little triple I, one of the conditions to be satisfied are that there's to be explicit identification by the Board of Education of which scheme the BOE has selected to move through the town's process. And then it coins a defined term called selected scheme. To my mind, and again, I'm a believer in process. I don't know if that's because I'm an attorney or if I'm an attorney because I'm a believer in process, but one way or the other, I'm a believer in process. To my mind, a board does not act just by assurances of its chair. It doesn't act by the assurances that come from a superintendent of schools or assurances that come even from a highly capable person like Ben Branyan standing at a lectern. A board acts by having a board vote on a proposition, and when a board has voted, that becomes the action of the board. Looking back at the minutes of the Board of Education at a working group that took place on the 8th of January 2015, I'm aware as I look at the minutes that Mr. Bernstein moved to accept, not accept and approve, not to adopt, not to ratify or other things, just to simply to accept the New Lebanon educational specifications in Attachment A. I wouldn't necessarily know what was Attachment A because I don't have privy to that, but I do have a copy of the educational specifications. And on the cover is a notation that is as they were approved by the Board of Education on January 8, 2015. And so I'm inclined to assume that that must be then what was on Attachment A that was accepted by the board. And the only notation that I can find in it which addresses the question of selection of site appears in the bottom 3 or possibly the bottom 2 paragraphs on page 38, which happens to be the same sections which members of the school board referenced to me as being, to their mind, as close as the board got to selecting a particular site. Allow me to read to you, if I can, those 2 short paragraphs. It recites as follows, quote, "The advisory committee recommended to the board that Scheme C, the new building option, was the best solution for the New Lebanon School, meeting the project objectives and educational objectives defined in the 2014 revised racial balance plan." Paragraph. The final decision on site layout, number of parking spaces, on-site vehicular circulation, and off-site traffic studies, including other site constraints, will be analyzed in more detail during the land use approval process. Final site approval is based upon approvals from various land use agencies of the town of Greenwich. Close quote. To my mind, to go back to the minutes for a moment, the acceptance of that report, including those 2 paragraphs on page 38, enjoyed a 7-0-1 vote of the board, the one abstention being Mr. Peter Sharon. 8 members were present. The other 7 voted in favor of the acceptance of that report. The condition that has been carved out and approved by the BET that will be a hoop that you will be asked to jump through before funds can be released to you, again says explicit identification by the Board of Education of which scheme the BOE has selected to move through the town's processes. For my purposes, and again, I'm only speaking for myself at that point, I will be looking for action by the Board of Education in which they make that identification. And to my mind, the technicality that concerns me is I believe, again, that a Board of Education acts by a vote of the Board of Education, not by the mere representation of important functionaries on its behalf. And to my mind, I don't think that vote has yet taken place. And I express that concern so that you're not surprised by that concern if we're looking at this issue in May or June. You're hearing it from me in April. I'm a supporter of this project. I'm sorry to create barriers for you, but again, I'm a believer in process.
So let's continue on the third condition. I'll see if I can take the lead on this one. Upon receipt and acceptance by the BET of an MI approval and preliminary site plan approval of the selected scheme by P&Z, Planning and Zoning, B, $1.85 million for continued A&E expenses, which bring us up to the 2.85, I'm sorry, for the development of the selected scheme. So adding on to what Mr. Raymer's saying, I think the purpose of the meeting when I put this item on the agenda is we need a little visual and we need to know what the steps are. So I think what you're hearing is that the Board of Ed has a piece of property. They would like to apply to the Board of Selectmen for municipal improvement. And the Board of Selectmen will have their requirements for that based on a particular project. From there, as that's going on, the Board of Education, the Board of Estimate and Taxation should be looking for a representative to serve on a building committee. That's part of our municipal code. I think that triggers, with the MI, the Board of Selectmen, to create a building committee, and they're in the process of doing that. And it's a lengthy process and whatever. At that point in time, the RTM has to approve those members through their process to serve on that building committee. That would trigger, the next step would likely be the first release, as we talked about earlier, from the BET, some of the subject to release money to continue on. And you've heard about that point where the building committee, and I agree with Mr. Raymer, and the Board of Ed should choose an architect with those funds. They'll have the funds to do that. Then the land use process begins with the other various conservation and wetlands, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. At the time of that MI, the RTM has an opportunity, if they so choose, to have that MI voted on by the whole representative town meeting. That's part of our process. They may choose not to. From that point in time, that building committee with all those land use approvals would come back to us for final release. That's layman terms for my ability, but that's how I see this process going forward. It got quiet, so that means everybody disagrees with me and doesn't want to tell me that, or that I might be close. So I think that's the purpose of today. I understand Mr. Raymer's point, and I think trying to leave you here, let you leave here tonight with your charge and thing. Obviously, you have enough time to do all this stuff, obviously. But I think that was it. And obviously, this has been a learning week for me. Mr. Tessie sent me the municipal code, and I never thought the day Mr. Tessie was going to outdo me in the municipal code. One for today. But with that, I mean, I think we're trying to follow these processes. So sort of my take on it and where we are, where we're trying to get to. I think we're all trying to get to the right spot and just the proper procedures to get there. So, Ms. Kieran?
Just to provide a different point of view on the site selection, I've heard in informal conversations at least 5 members of the Board of Education say they chose Scheme C. I've heard the chairman of the Board of Education at our BET public hearing before our vote on the budget say several times in her remarks that Scheme C is selected. I think we've already heard Ben say it tonight. I'm personally satisfied that that particular condition is met. And I would encourage my other colleagues to join me in that point of view. But if you do not agree with that, I think tonight would be the night to say something, to ask the question, to make clear that you need more information or some other indication, and not wait beyond this week, because as you can tell from this calendar, it's a very, very compressed schedule with a number of parallel processes happening at the same time. So that's my one observation. A second observation I'd like to make.
To my ability, I have said so.
Great. And if there's anybody else, may they speak now or forever hold their peace. I hope you will speak up. On the fourth request for information, we said any other information analysis requested by the BET. The intention of that was not to be overbroad or provide a hindrance to your process. But I think it was meant to capture a number of questions that we had heard informally from BET members before we voted on March 19th. And that is also, I would point out, something that we should deal with right away and be timely and reasonable about whatever we need and ask for that information very quickly.
Is anyone else? So we have some homework ahead of us.
There's a question here.
I'm sorry, Ms. Tarkington?
But I do believe that in our discussions, it was always considered that with this building committee, like other building committees, it would be the building committee that would issue the RFP for the architect, and that it would already have gone through the MI process with the Board of Selectmen. And so therefore, the MI would have been received from the Board of Selectmen, and the building committee would have been formulated. And then that building committee would be taking the specifications as approved by the BOE and given to the selectmen, and they would call that first meeting once the same building committee members were approved by the RTM. And that group would then take these specifications, issue the RFP for the architect, et cetera. We never envisioned the type of process that you're putting forth because perhaps like the feasibility committee, that had never been done before by the town, and therefore it's a variant from our process. And I do believe that we were thinking about the architect coming only after the specifications were delivered to the building committee.
If I can respond, Mr. Chairman. I think the conditions still work, Leslie. I think you're correct that the exact steps that we're hearing tonight from Ben were not exactly what we were thinking about at the time. But I think the conditions still work. I think Ben's process works. The element for me that has moved forward more quickly is the Board of Selectmen process. Because by the time we vote, MI will likely be referred by the Board of Selectmen according to the schedule Ben has given to us. And so MI is site-specific. So at that point in time, we'll know, for those of us who are doubting or still have a question, which site it is. Respectfully, with two members of the Board of Selectmen here, I wonder if there's anything they want to raise, since they have a far more compressed schedule than we have, or information they might need that overlaps with ours, that we could be more efficient if we're working together on this.
Do you want to? Mr. Tessie? Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. And I think several points have been very appropriately stated here in terms of the looking for the clarity in terms of the site, but I think perhaps perfunctory, it would be assuring to all of us if we hear directly from the chair of the Board of Education on the record that in fact it is a Scheme C that is the approved location, and that is what will be accompanying the request for MI when it comes before the Board of Selectmen in the next several weeks. And accompanying that, of course, are all the pertinent elements of the conditions that you have placed, for which we have a shared desire for, and I think Selectman Marzullo's concern is that there be ample time within the context of the proposed MI approval for that information to accompany that request for MI. And that's something, again, you may not be able to answer tonight, but I do think it will be a necessity for the board prior to giving the green light on the MI. Does that make sense? In terms of, so when we get the MI request, we're going to want the same information that the BET has delineated in their condition regarding the environmental.
They could do a survey.
And this falls in line with the process that we use for the Byram Park pool process, that we requested that we were approving it, that there be an understanding that certain things were done, and there were 3 things, because we were told very clearly that we do not have authority to condition an MI, and so therefore we went with an understanding, and I believe P&Z followed that up when they took the matter up. They made sure that those things were addressed, or at least 2 of those things. I think one issue on that matter is still outstanding. So far, that's all we have, and again, I will just say that the building committee process in terms of interviews began last Friday. I think we're up to 15 people who have expressed interest, or upwards to 15, and we have an abundance of talent, which is good, but we're taking our time, and each interview is 30 minutes times 3, so we feel we'll have a very qualified team in place, and if we see a gap in terms of skill set, we're certainly going to reach out to the community, to you, to anyone who perhaps can identify someone that fills that requisite need for the committee to be functional.
Mr. Chairman,
One sec.
if I may, on that point, the question was raised whether for this building committee the rules requiring minority party representation apply to this. And we were musing that we hadn't heard this sort of representation requirement applied to the MISA Building Committee or others. I saw Gene McLaughlin was here. I don't know if he's still here.
We have requested that. We had requested
do we
that.
Do we have a decision on that or an opinion?
Not yet. Wayne would have one, I think, sometime very soon. He didn't want to, without checking with Gene or whatever, he has his own opinion, but he wants to confer with Gene. Whatever. His answer was, to be perfectly frank, his answer was he thinks it does apply to committees as well, but he does not want to
See if I can find it for you.
sure yet.
Mr. Johnson?
I just want to clarify a little bit. So my thinking when we refer to Scheme C, I'm all in favor for moving this forward and going towards the MI process, trying to get MI approval. I guess I like to think of this, and I'm not putting any conditions whether that it's that if it is C, that's the preferred Scheme C. But I would still like to have see the building committee have the flexibility, should they look at geotech results, or when they look into the actual building costs, of possibly recommending some other site, if it's perhaps A with renovations. And I'm not saying I'm for that, but by the outside chance, there may be a lower cost version that the building committee should have some say in what to at least look at or recommend to the broader town. So, but I'm if C is what everybody seems to agree with, I'm in favor of following the process, moving along as soon as we can to get MI approval. But there are people in town that have some doubts and would like to see some options for the building committee to look at.
Mr. Chairman?
Ms. O'Neill?
I guess I should say clearly that we did vote on C, and the process we use when we accept a document and the board votes on something, they accept the whole document and all that is in it. We don't accept pieces of it. So therefore, Site C is part of the ED specifications that we adopted and voted on and accepted. So it is Scheme C that we voted on as the place where we would like to build a new school for New Lebanon.
Thank you. Okay. One last question, Mr. Ms. Weissler, you had spoken. Yeah.
I just had a question. I think it's for Ben, actually. Can you address, Ben, it sounds like we're referring back to this issue of geotech and how that could have a bearing on, ultimately the costs and the risks and everything else. Can you describe when you would envision doing that? And, I guess I'm raising the question, if it could be a significant factor, why not move that up in the process? I don't know how expensive it is.
I would envision that process would begin once an architect is engaged in the MI process, and then the building committee at that point will say, well, does it make sense when's the best time to make that? Right now, it's hard for me to say, you do it in July or August, but I think it does make sense as a layman in the process that the earlier you know, the better decisions you can make in the future. So I would refer that to the building committee, the architect, when they start the process for MI, of whether or not how viable Scheme C is. I hear the concern, and the point I'll mention is just it's the same process that all the building committees use, and the most recent one is MISA, and the board and the ed specs had certain things, and the building committee said that's creating a struggle for us, both because of contaminations that they found, and they were looking at options, and they asked the board to reconsider their ed specs, but the board decided not to change the ed specs. So that would be the process if the issue with Scheme C and the building new and it becomes completely unfeasible, then they would say, well, the ed specs are saying new building, we need to go back to the board, and that's when other touch point processes. But the geotechnical issue would be dealt with after we get funds with an architect.
I would just kind of agree with that, because an architect really has got to know. I mean, you have a thematic or conceptual design for a new building at sea, but once the architect that's hired who's going to do the construction documents may have a little variation or whatever, and you don't want to start a geotech process by drilling holes all over the place. You want to kind of know exactly where that might go. So that'll save money and effort.
Last question, Mr. Goldrick, and we'll wrap this up.
And just very briefly, I think my view is that where you put a school, how many people you put in it, and so on, is the responsibility of the Board of Education. You have been elected to make those difficult decisions. I think in terms of what we are asking here, it's simply the due diligence of a finance board so that we understand that when we release several millions of dollars of funds, it is for a specific building at a specific location, and all of the I's have been dotted, et cetera. It's not to circumvent or take your responsibility away from you. We understand that this is a multi-year approach, and that's just to clarify.
Okay. Ben, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Back to our agenda. For all the Board of Ed members, and I see some of the RTM represented here, and thank you for coming. Obviously, we're trying to get this process open and transparent. I think tonight's a step towards that. I think that's important. So thank you very much.
And thank you very much.
Okay, moves us to item 3, and Mr. Raymer, if I'm not mistaken, SE-8 and SE-9 have been withdrawn.
I'm so told, but I don't know by whom or at whose request.
Okay.
The Law Committee reviewed these items, but that's not relevant if they're not going to be on the agenda.
I did receive an email from the Law Department tonight that those are not ready for us, so those will be pushed. So that leads us to item SE-10, and I would call on Mr. Raymer to get that moving.
Executive committee.
Is that Loeffler?
Yes, I'm not sure if we need an executive session on this.
Loeffler, at the request of the town attorney, is not an item for consideration by the BET. The town attorney engaged the Law Committee in some...
Excuse me. I think I would like to move that we move into executive session, please.
I don't think we're going to need it, Mr. Chairman. Let's see how this develops, and it's in your hands, Mr. Chairman, to overrule me if you like. The town attorney engaged us in some conversations, but made the recommendation to us that he does not want formal consideration of a settlement authority, most particularly is not looking for a vote on a settlement authority from the BET or from the Law Committee until such time as he has had an opportunity to engage in settlement conversations with the plaintiff. So although we had conversations on this subject, there was no formal vote at the Law Committee. The Law Committee will not be making a recommendation to the full BET, and it was not my understanding that this item would appear on the agenda of the BET. And I'm recommending to the chair that the item be withdrawn from the agenda.
I would like to move into I'd like to make a motion that we move into executive session, please.
Okay, one step at a time. Attorney McLaughlin, I'm caught between my Law Committee members here.
Well, I mean, as a courtesy to my colleague, I'll second her motion for it to be considered in due course.
Is this something we need a discussion on? Is this an item that should be postponed? I look for your advice.
I would like to discuss it tonight, and I'm not looking, as Mr. Raymer says, for a formal vote. We've had some issues in the past where the vote has become public.
Got it.
But what I'm looking for is to discuss this with the full board, because I'm entering into negotiations
Got it.
with the plaintiff's counsel.
So with that being said, excuse me 1 second. With that being said, Ms. Tarkington's motion to go into executive session has been seconded by Mr. Raymer. Discussion on that motion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? 7:29, going into executive session, discuss a settlement with...
From the Health Department in the amount of $5,000, which is approval to use the grant. And the last one is PD9 from the Police Department, $26,667, which is approval to use a grant.
I will second the motion.
Items have been moved and second. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? I'm going to log that as 1200. That brings us to item number 5, non-routine applications. I will call on the chair of the Budget Committee, Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion for NW2, Nathaniel Witherall, a transfer of $160,000 for maintenance expenses.
The item has been moved. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
Seconded by Mr. Raymer. Committee report followed by discussion.
The Director of Facilities for Nathaniel Witherall appeared before the Budget Committee, explained that they have a surplus of funds of $160,000 within their heating fuel expense line due to the lower cost of fuel this past year, as well as efficiencies achieved from the HVAC upgrades during their Project Renew in Nathaniel Witherall. This surplus is to be used for maintenance requirements, additional maintenance requirements for a number of items, including elevator wander guard security, improved Wi-Fi coverage, additional electrical code requirements, fire alarm programming, and extra snow removal, among a number of items. So again, it's $160,000 used from the heating fuel line to go towards these maintenance items. The committee voted 4-0 to approve this.
Discussion on the item? Ms. Tarkington?
Yes. In the Budget Committee, I did support this, and but I asked for additional information. The sheet clearly states that the amount of $95,000 of this was unbudgeted expenses in electrical and safety requirements that were not addressed by the Project Renew renovations. In other words, that would make them capital expenditures, not operating. I asked for a list of these items. They are small in terms of numbers, but nevertheless, they appear to be capital. The account was overspent, and it was really only after, once again, pursuing this earlier today, after asking for it at last week's Budget Committee meeting, that Roland Geiger was very helpful and obtained the information. So I think that this process is flawed, and I'll be voting accordingly this evening.
Further discussion? Ms. Kiernan?
At the Budget Committee meeting, we also talked about Project Renew and when it would finish up, and if there were any more items left. And I see Alan Brown here and Art's here, and I wonder if either one could just address whether we're through the punch list or we still have a few items to go.
Good evening. The building committee is finished with the project. They came in, on time and on budget. As to Leslie's point, almost everything that's happened in the building during the past 2 years somehow relates to Project Renew. When you take 3 buildings, essentially one 80 years old, one 50 years old, and one 40 years old, when you touch the left hand, the right hand's going to be affected. And as Leslie pointed out, the list of items that goes into this $95,000, there's actually 88 items on the list that Leslie asked for. Some of them are as inexpensive as $130, and some of them go up over $1,000 or $2,000, or even some of them are at $3,000. Many of them are they were performed by essentially 5 different contractors: an electrical contractor, a cabling company, a company that does programming of the fire alarm systems, and much of that expenditure is labor related. In other words, the fire alarm company had to reprogram the fire system because the new fire system was installed while the old system was still functioning, and then when the new system was turned over, it had to be programmed, and not all of the programming was handled as part of the project. So to respond to Ms. Tarkington's point, was it related to Project Renew? You could make an argument that it was, but was it capital? It depends on how you look at it. A software supplier provides intellectual property, not capital equipment. I'm not an accountant. I can't provide advice on how that should go, but from my view, especially because of the low numbers at each invoice, it's not capital. Maybe Peter and Roland have a different opinion, but that's the way I see it.
Roland, what's the threshold for a capital project, dollar-wise?
$10,000 per item for equipment, $25,000.
And so clearly, most of these are under the $10,000 threshold.
Yeah, and they were done. They weren't done as part of a lump sum project. As the building, it's kind of like any of us who would build a new house. We would think we would take care of everything, but when we move in, we see, there's a lamp that needs to go here, and there's no outlet that is where we want the lamp. So we hire an electrician to put the outlet there. Some of the invoices here are for installation and repair of a Wi-Fi system that we didn't plan on losing, but because of the major impact of the demolition, wires were disconnected, wires were severed, amplifiers were missing, and the architect really didn't design a new Wi-Fi system because the old one was intended to continue working, but it didn't. So we had to hire somebody to come in and replace the Wi-Fi. Again, was it part of Project Renew? Well, surely it was related to Project Renew, but it wasn't part of the project. The architect didn't design it, and we had to come in and rebuild it. The same thing related to some of the cabling for the security system, some of the phone system cables, some of the fire system wiring, and so on and so forth. So these things have been addressed since the project was finished last July.
Alan, I'm going to ask my colleagues to not vote for this. And I'm going to tell you why. The BET has the authority under Section 30 of the Charter to transfer any uncommitted balance for anything to anything else. We have that authority. We also had a longstanding agreement with the RTM that we would not transfer operating to capital or capital to capital, we would keep them separate. I will honor that agreement. But what I will not be able to tolerate is at giving forgiveness when we should have asked for permission. I let it go at that. This money has already been spent. These transfers have already been done. You've already made this commitment. This cannot happen. I will not accept this by any department in the town. You're a department in the town. You're fiscal stewards of the town. Need I say more? So that's my position on this. It's not my favorite position. As everybody knows, I'm a pretty strong fan of Nathaniel Witherell, but anything I've just said is, I'll debate it with anybody. But that's exactly how I feel. Mr. Finger.
So for clarification, all of this work has already been done prior to the request for the funds, the transfer?
Yes.
When I sat in the Budget Committee in the back of the room while you were discussing whether this be a routine item or not, it was going to be a non-routine item. This is basics. So I will call for the vote on this item. If there's no other, Mr. Raymer?
I don't disagree with the principle that our chair has enunciated, but I mean, for what it's worth, on the health department item, I pointed out to the Budget Committee that the contracts to execute the work for which the grant was received was already signed a month and a half before our meeting of the Budget Committee. She committed the town with her signature to accept the funds and do the work, and the issue wasn't raised there. It's probably a good principle. We probably need to hunker down and get going with that principle and apply it consistently. But I do want to point out that we're approving items tonight. We discussed items at the Budget Committee in which we were not taking rigid adherence to the rule. The item I'm referring to, I guess, is HD6. We handled as a routine item. No problem, says us, sign the contract a month and a half before you ask for approval to spend the funds. Commit us, it doesn't matter. It's not exactly quite as rigorous, Mr. Chairman, as you're suggesting that we should be.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Goldrick?
Along those lines, I might also point out that on PD9, those funds began to be used on April 1st without our approval as well. So if you want to be rigorous in applying all of these, we have several items here.
Point well taken.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Johnson?
I also agree with the principle you're trying to make, and it is unfortunate that $160,000 worth of funds were used. I look at these as primarily operating funds. But I will vote for this application because I think, again, it's a lot of worthy expenditures that had to be done, although hopefully there's a lesson here that in the future they will come before us, especially for such a large amount. So I will vote for this.
Let's put it more affirmatively. In the future, you will come to us before you spend the money.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Norton?
I would just like to reiterate the comments my predecessor has just made. I will support it. I agree with the point you're making. I support the point that you're making. I think we should follow process. Has not been done, and it's not the first time it has not been done, but I do support the opinion of my predecessor.
It's pretty straightforward. No agent of the town shall commit an expense on behalf of the municipality without appropriation. It's cut and dry. Mr. Blankley?
Mr. Chairman, I quite agree, but maybe on this occasion, since, as Mr. Johnson has just said, these expenditures were needed, so perhaps if we go ahead and vote for it, I shall be voting for it, but on the proviso that your principle as that you just expressed is well taken and accepted by the rest of the board.
Well said.
All those in favor, raise your hands. Aye, please.
Aye.
I see 4, 5, 6, 7. Randy is 8, 9. I call that 9, if I'm counting correctly. Opposed? 1, 2, 3. Abstaining? I counted, Leslie. Abstaining, 0, so that 9-3-0. Assessor's report. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, fellow members of the BET. I'd like to present the assessor's report for April 2015. First of all, we are currently accepting applications for our senior tax relief program. We have roughly about 178 of those applications complete. We sent a letter to all those who have not yet visited our office, and we're continuing to call them so that they will meet the deadline by May 15th. Okay, we have probably additional 80 or so people to get into our office. Okay. Secondly, we are sending out our income and expense information to all commercial properties here in town. It's imperative that we do it this year, being the year just before the revaluation, as this information will be used quite extensively in our valuation of these commercial properties. Okay. Anybody have any questions for me tonight?
I don't have any questions, but
Mr. Raymer has his hand. Mr. Martin will be next. I'm sorry.
During the caucus preceding the meeting, our liaison with your department brought our attention to your paragraph 2, the Board of Assessment and Appeals results. Pardon my cold. I wonder if you wanted to comment further on that.
Our estimate.
Make a derogatory noise if you
want. No, I won't do that. I think I was as surprised as anybody when I saw the amount of reductions that the Board of Assessment Appeals did do. Just as a normal course, the year before revaluation, we usually don't see that many appeals and that amount of reduction. That being said, as the assessor's office really has no input into what the Board of Assessment Appeals does, we basically, the only thing we can do is take the changes that they recommend and implement it, which is what we had. But my estimation, I gave figures to Roland. I was quite surprised by them as well.
So that, in summary, that means my thought would be when we go to set the mill rate, we're either going to have to adjust the mill rate or fund balance to compensate for that, to stay balanced.
That says it.
Mr. Finger?
I think it's also points out that position of a member of the Board of Assessment Appeals should not be just a pro forma appointment. When the town committees look to fill those seats, they should just satisfy themselves that the individuals who are seeking the positions understand what the role is, what the responsibilities are. There's a handbook that's, if I remember, is like 30 or 50 pages long. There's state statutes involved. I mean, it's not just something where you show up during part of a month, collect your check, and have some hearings. That there are procedures, there are legal requirements as to what's to be done.
If I may comment on that, and I think it'll get there are other ramifications too as to what the Board of Assessment Appeals does. If they make a change to one property, and there are similar properties that are affected by this change, if we are then if somebody then appeals their assessment, and we are in judges' chambers, and this has happened to us, we have to give deference to what the Board of Assessment Appeals has done on other properties as well. My job is not just to put fair market value on all these properties, but to make sure that they were equally treated and that there's equity. That's truly the issue with the Board of Assessment Appeals. If they do make a change, it could have far, in a condominium complex, for instance, it could affect all the condo units in that complex. If they make one change, I then have an obligation, if anybody else comes forward, to make that change as well.
Mr. Norton, I'm sorry.
As you know, well, I was going to pose that question to you after I indicated my compliment to you for the number of cases that were resolved in the past month. And you also indicated to me that that continues today.
Yes, we did settle 4 more, so we're down to 20. What do we have? 22.
22.
22. That being said, we do not know the implications or what the ramifications yet of what's going to happen from this latest appeal. Any taxpayer has the ability after 60 days to still file an appeal against the town. So we sent these notices out on March 25th. So We have a couple, 4 or 5 more weeks
you're
before
about
we'll
halfway.
understand. Yeah.
Carrying forward, could you do a review of the cases that might specifically relate to similar cases that could have a like effect?
Sure. I could. I mean, as far as what? In other words,
The number of cases that the BAA
that have
Just,
basically forced my hand. Yeah.
Can you identify similar cases that the town has that could have had a similar impact?
It has happened. Yes, I can certainly identify that.
You know, can I get a motion that the
I move that we approve the assessor's report.
moved by Ms. Tarkington, second by Mr. Finger? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Thank you. Sorry for the delay tonight, but I had you could see that was a pretty interesting item, so I thought it was important that we do that sort of earlier on. Hello, Peter. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, BET members. The Controller's Report. The first topic is the annual budget process, and after the BET is done voting in March, I usually meet with RTM members, members of the subcommittees that report back to the chairs, and then that's filtered down to the full RTM in May. This year, there's been unusual activity in the odd funds. The odd funds is slang. In the finance department, we call the odd funds every fund that's not a general fund. And some of the areas that there's interest, the first one was the OPEB trust fund. I think some of you remember a few weeks ago, it was led by Rebecca Steinfeld and Michael Wasik. A lot of that interest has gone away because we fully funded the OPEB. There's other areas, and this is somewhat unusual because usually the funds that are other than a general fund are not really scrutinized closely, and they're just, I don't want to use the word rubber stamp, they go through quickly. Usually the activity is on the capital project side at the end of the voting in May. Other examples are the sewer maintenance. When we had the appropriation in the summer last year, the out of sequence, off cycle, it opened up a lot of eyes on the RTM, and now there's interest on how you charge to the sewer maintenance for the sewer improvement. So that's out there now, and I know that Leslie over the years has made that argument about sewer M versus sewer I. For some reason, the parking fund has got renewed interest. There's, as Roland and I reminded some RTM members that they were the ones years ago that drove that fund down purposely. Now the RTM newer ones are complaining that we've raided it and we've taken all the money away, who were not around 10, 15 years ago. The obvious ones, and this year has been unusual for the Nathaniel Witherall with the deficits, the concerns of what's going to happen not only this budget year for next year, but the year after when the donations go away and the historic credits are no longer there. So it's really a heads up because I've been meeting, and I know there's going to be a report specific to the odd funds, to the Budget Oversight Committee and the Finance Committee. So you be prepared when you go to your district meetings and your Finance Committee, which I go to with Mark and Mary Lee this year. So be prepared. You might get questions on the sewer maintenance, sewer improvement, and the respective committees. Be prepared for the FARC fund and the OPEB. There might be questions, but the issue has gone away since we fully funded it at 100%. So that's somewhat of a heads up. Just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. Also, Roland just handed me a note, and good news, ADP. Finally have some good news that all the payrolls have been posted through the April 17th payroll. It's good news for a bunch of us. Number one, the departments now have general ledgers they can look at, and they can go to the BET in May in case they need to go to the BET and the RTM in June. So we've got everything posted, and we're only, I would be surprised if other than the Public Works because of the snow budget being overdrawn, which I think it's happened 2 or 3 times in the last 5 years, I don't suspect anybody's going to be really surprised with overdrawn budgets, whether it's in the overtime accounts, in the major public safety departments, or whatever.
So Pete, excuse me, so we'll see most of those requests in May?
I hope that's not the right term. I hope it's only one, maybe Public Works.
And I have offered, sorry to interrupt you, I have offered Peter, and on behalf of our board, if we need to have a special session for those departments. I mean, it wasn't in their control, and I think, if they needed that help, I think we would, try to accommodate that.
Yeah. And then moving along with ADP, we've got 2 sets of consultants, Barry Dunn and the Geneva consultant, which is referenced in the report, helping us out. There's weekly phone calls with ADP with various people, so everybody is staying on top of the ADP issue. It's a number one priority, and it's what's mentioned in the report. We've got support from the First Selectman and the Board of Education Superintendent with the steering committee. Having said that, I'll open it up to any questions on the rest of the report.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Norton? Make notes here. Mr. Norton, Ms. Weissler, Mr. Finger.
What I'd like to do is refer other members of the committee, of this board, to the third page and the last paragraph on the third page, which specifically relates to an earlier item. And if you read the paragraph, there's language in there, in different lines, that relates to an earlier item.
Got it.
Well, it begins here.
Got it. Okay. Ms. Weissler?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you look at page 7 and 8 of the report, it's talking about the bank reconciliation, and I thought, Pete, we might want to update BET members. We had a call with Kathleen and Roland today, and as far as I know, as of midday today, that the current amount needed to be reconciled, I believe, was about $540,000. Is that correct?
Yes.
Pete?
Nancy's referring to page 8, very top, where the difference between the treasurer and the budget director was $1,050,000. But what was missing on there was 3 payrolls. There was an early December, I think it was December 6th. There was a December 31st adjusting entry, and then there was a January 10th entry. One of the items was posted was the January 10th, which was $510,803, which knocked that $1,050,000 down to about $540,000. What's important now was the first objective, as far as reconciling general ledger to cash or vice versa, is making sure all the payrolls are posted. So we're looking at a difference of $540,000, and then what the treasurer can do, to go back to Nancy's point, we go back to page 7. And you can see on the bottom the 3 budget bullets there. They can start analyzing the bullets 1, 2, and 3, which is a variety. It's the checks that are issued and then voided. Then there's the checks that are issued that were never put in the original payroll. You missed somebody's overtime, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the process where we're trying to get to the goal line is in score a touchdown here and get this implementation up and running, the reconciling items are starting to go away with the posting of the general ledger. And I think
I was going to say, to add some additional information, since I guess this was written today's conference call with ADP, there was an update on the vendor files. I think the outstanding issue is Transamerica, and I think what we heard from Allison Graham today is that there are 2 files which still need work. They're both in test production mode, and we expect as of May 1st one of those files to run successfully, and the other one we're in the process of evaluating, which case with both of them running successfully, all the back pension information, it's been funded, but all the back pension data and records would get transferred. So I think that had been a significant outstanding issue, and sort of there's some light at the end of the tunnel on that issue as well.
Thank you. Mr. Finger, followed by Ms. Kiernan.
Yeah, Pete, you mentioned when some of the members of the RTM Finance Committee were speaking to you about or focusing on sewer improvement versus sewer maintenance and how one is classified or how work is classified either as improvement or maintenance. Were there any questions about the difference between how sewer improvement is financed compared to sewer maintenance, 20-year versus 5 years?
We just, the basics of improving capacity versus maintenance. One of the questions that came up is why was the Shore Road project charged in the sewer maintenance as opposed to the sewer improvement? And the argument is, and it is a gray area. We were increasing the capacity of the sewer system. We were simply taking old I don't want to say rotten, but aged, that could fail pipes and replacing them. Then the counter argument is well, yeah, but they're rarely improving the capacity because they're bigger and they're better. So without a charter change and really looking at this issue, where you clearly differentiate between the two, there's going to be arguments on both sides, and I think you've had them within your own.
Roland, Bob Brady, and I really went to work on
There were no questions focused on how sewer improvement funds are allocated or appropriated with 20-year bonds and sewer maintenance 5 years. That's been our practice, although the charter doesn't specify.
The answer is no. That it might have been early on, maybe 3 weeks ago or something like that. There is somewhat new members of the BET from time to time, new members of the RTM. A lot of them. And the point I was trying to make before is a lot of people would vote on the sewer maintenance and sewer improvement, the odd fund budgets, and never really know the mechanics of what was inside of it. And it was eye-opening to some this time. And again, I'm working through a spokesman. I don't know who the people are behind the spokesman. There was surprise that sewer improvement is 20-year bonding, and sewer maintenance, you need a charter change to go from the pay-as-you-go system to a 20-year bonding system. So there is surprise, but I don't know the degree of questions, and I won't know until I sit there and I see the report. They give me the benefit, and this wasn't only this year and prior years, to read the report for accuracy and for corrections, which I did with the OPEB report about a month ago. So there's questions out there. I'm going to say there's more surprise than anything in that area.
Ms. Kiernan?
Pete, 2 questions. We had been given a lot of data on private equity positions in our packet that we normally don't get, and I wonder if you'd speak to the volume of capital calls it looks like we've had in 6 months' time, from September through March.
I really can't speak to it other than to say that it's timing. Mm-hmm. It's just they're coming together. They come before the BET. They can come in the summer of a year, and we might not get capital calls until the first quarter of the next calendar.
You can't predict.
It's just coincidental that they're all coming together as far as the volume and the timing of it.
Okay.
So I don't know if you want an analysis of why they're coming, the volume.
Well, you can't predict. You can't predict these calls typically. So my sense would just be to understand this volume versus, say a 5-year average, and it sounds like it's higher than normal. Is that a fair statement?
I'm just saying that it's coincidental.
Okay.
It needs money.
Yep, got it. Second question, Pete, is you reference a couple of RFPs for professionals in your report, and I know Mr. Raymer may be asked to speak to this, but both for IBIC and NEPC, is that something that the BET will be voting on to approve those choices?
The NEPC was the top vote getter, and I haven't seen the scorecards of the other 4. I've heard that they came out number 1. There was only 2 candidates, 2 finalists. Morgan Stanley was the other one. The chairman and Mr. Simon are drafting a report, and it's going to go to Mr. Drake on April 29th, the BET Investment Advisory Committee. And then I'm assuming the recommendation is going to be the NEPC. However, it's qualified. There's going to be a management change within NEPC, which is demanded in order for us to re-up NEPC. The same partner will not be there any longer. And I'm not privy to, I only know pieces of what's in the report. So the answer to the first part is that it's going to it's going to the Investment Advisory April 29th, and it'll go to the full BET. I think it's May 18th next month, whatever the full BET. IBIC, I don't recall. There would be you do the auditors, but you don't do the actuaries. So you do the retirement consultants, which you don't do IBIC. I don't believe, and I don't know if anybody can correct me, that there's any requirement for the BET to approve the
I think we have approved that the last time. That
If you want,
contract was
I mean, if you want, it's very simple. I can bring it to the BET at the same time in May.
I think we're going to have under the law committee report a little more info on this. So if I
On the NEPC issue.
Yes.
But I don't know if they opined on IBIC.
It was only as to NEPC.
You know, it's not that much effort just to keep it clean. I'll bring IBIC and you can vote on them along with.
Okay. Can I get a motion to controller's report be accepted?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Okay.
Move to accept the treasurer's report.
I have a motion for the acceptance of the treasurer's report, seconded by Mr. Finger. Discussion? All those in?
Yeah. I
Mr. Drake?
just want to ask Peter and Roland while you're here, do you want to mention the reimbursement that the town obtained in the last 24 or 48 hours for the from Hartford from the?
No, I don't.
That's okay.
Really?
See, this is not fair to a certain member of the BET. I promised I would not say anything because when I was working with Leslie around 4 o'clock last Friday, and Leslie was drafting her MISA report, I said I would not mention it during my controller's report.
Well, then,
so
thank you for your discretion, and I'm sorry I threw a curveball.
It's good news. So I'm going to defer to Leslie.
Okay. All right, back to acceptance of the treasurer's report. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? That motion is carried. BET Standing Committee reports. I forgot to check off the box that says law. Mr. Raymer?
Mr. Chairman, back in February, the BET meeting in February, you turned to me in open session and asked if the law committee would kindly consult with the town attorney and look at the issue of whether Charter Section 208A requires that the BET approve a contract between the retirement board and its pension advisor, which at the current time is New England Pension Consultants, NEPC. We consulted the following month with Assistant Town Attorney McLaughlin, but he indicated that time that he wanted to consult also with Attorney Fox, and at our last meeting I so indicated. I'd like to report to you now that at the Law Committee meeting last Thursday, Attorney Fox and Attorney McLaughlin were present, which formed an excellent opportunity to try and bring that issue to a conclusion, especially in light of the fact that the current contract with NEPC expires at the end of June. After due deliberation, those two town attorneys reached the same result in their opinion being that Section 208A does require that the BET approve such a contract. At the conclusion of that discussion, Mrs. Tarkington and I gave consideration to the matter as a law committee and concurred with the result that was reached by attorneys Fox and McLaughlin, and we're so reporting to this board at this time.
Going back to that, first of all, thank you. You're welcome. Staying with that, that was a question we had, so we should probably ask Elaine to take that opinion or that.
Elaine's not here.
When she gets back, and just make sure a copy of that goes in our policy manual, so we have it to refer back to when the time comes. So
it would be good to relay it to the retirement board too.
Yeah, that's probably that was a good one. Okay, so yes, thank you, Peter. Nothing else. Item number 10, liaisons. I have nothing. We do have under item 11, MISA. You have your report.
You can just skip her, that's all.
Now that we're all waiting, sitting at the edge of the seat.
I just want to bring attention, we had a slight disturbance in our caucus, and I'm going to call on Mr. Johnson to point out a slight error in the MISA report.
Well, originally I tried to point it out to Ms. Tarkington, but she redirected my pointing to the finance department. The last page, the total of bonds issued is $10,570,000. I think in the Excel spreadsheet, that last square of $21,399,000 was not added in. So I asked Roland for his opinion on that. I think he will tell us the updated number or agree that that should be
So
31 million plus.
So
9.
Ms. Tarkington's reports are always fantastic, so we had a little fun with her in caucus and teased her just a little bit. So thank you for your report. It's
But the most important news in my report, I tried to add some things to my report this month. It updates both in terms of the OSF, which is our state reimbursement program, particularly since we had New Lebanon School here, but also because everyone has been working on this for absolutely years. We had the initial application approval for MISA in December 2012, and I think everyone is thrilled that actually today we received our initial progress payment, our very first one on MISA, for $4,018,815. So that represents a lot of work over the last several years, and we're thrilled to get this in. And quite frankly, the building committee doesn't know about it yet. I'm going to tell them at tomorrow morning's meeting. We meet at 7:30 tomorrow morning. So that's the good news. We also, this week, we believe, but Ron Matten is going to confirm, we haven't got the confirming papers, that the OSF has signed off on the FF&E application that we had made earlier. And again, we don't have it in the formalized writing, but that's great news. This project doesn't have as much traditional FF&E because many of the things that you would think about as FF&E were actually included in our construction contract. You know, the curtains and the, seating and so forth. So that's good news. But then our amendment, you only get one opportunity to make an amendment on these school projects. And so we'd gather it up, all the expenses, hoping that we're sort of at the end of it, and made the application slightly earlier this year, and in January, so, and we've heard that now that the OSF is going to evaluate it in December of 2015 and put it onto the bonding for June 2016. So it does give a perspective of how long it takes and how much work goes into obtaining the state funding, and that, again, as we look at New Lebanon, we'll be appropriating the full amount, and there will be state reimbursement, but they're, like MISA, and I must say, everyone has been very diligent on MISA, and it's the building committee that puts together all this work, but the state makes the applications. There are big delays without just the way the system works.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And I should add that two things, really. MISA now is more than 72% complete, and, we'll get its TCO early this summer, around, early July. But we'll be starting really a second major building project with the, demolition of the existing auditorium and the instructional space, and we'll be combining phases 2 and 3 to make it one major project. And so that work will begin shortly after the children leave the high school, June 18th.
Well, I have a half dozen or so nieces, nephews, my daughter. They want parking, Leslie.
Uh-oh.
So
they're
on notice.
Your daughter's not a
junior yet, is she?
No, but she will be.
Well, Amy will be helping. Next month I'll give you a report, because the in order to get the TCO, there will be additional parking sort of between the existing parking lot and the fields, and the Commissioner of Public Works and her department will be doing that work for the MISA Building Committee this summer. So your daughter will be thrilled. By next fall, there'll be additional parking places.
One of the spaces has to be for an obscenely large red truck.
And also a truck from Chicken Joe's.
Wow. Mr. Blankley, you heard that about the chicken. All right. I figured I'd take the heat off me with the truck, and you can deal with the school lunch fund. Okay. I have nothing else. Okay, new business. As we've been talking about, every 2 years we review our debt and fund balance policy. My job tonight is to set up a special committee for that. Just a little background so we're all, for the media and for everybody watching, we're trying to figure this out, Peter. It was 4 years ago when bond counsel it was a little bit longer than that bond counsel had asked us for a fund balance policy, right? And then we incorporated a debt with it. Is that how it sort of?
Bill Lindsay, can you hear me on this?
Yeah.
Bill Lindsay and I came to the audit committee in February of 2011. I think the committee was Norton, Raymer, Pellegrino, and Kelly.
Yes.
Did I get it right? Okay. And we brought a lot of metrics to the meeting, and we had a lot of discussion, and we went all the way through. And the first one was approved July of 11 by the full BET.
Okay.
And
so that would stand to reason.
We wrote into the policy that it had to be renewed not less than every 2 years. So up to 2 years, but it had to be within 2 years. And we approved the next one, or the last one, September of 2013. And I was just looking at the minutes. And the working group that you're about to put together, and I couldn't find out who the working group other than Pellegrino was on the last one. There was no minutes taken. It was just posted agendas. And then there was a report that came out of it from the chair. And it was, and I can make copies of the minutes for the members. I think Randy supplied some edits, and they took edits from within and outside the group. And then there was a report that was presented in September of 13, and the vote was 7-6 in 2013. So the process is that we post agendas, no minutes, and then there's a final decision. Probably a goal of either July or September of this year.
My initial thought would be to ask the group to come back with a draft in June and hopefully an approval in July before we typically break for I call it the August recess. So that would be my goal. So I'd like to ask Mr. Drake to take the lead on that, and Ms. Kiernan, Mr. Finger, and Ms. Weissler. I would like, when you post the agendas, I'll ask Elaine to make sure that all the BET members are invited. Certainly, these are probably not going to be evening meetings. These could be mornings or your choice. But you have your work cut out for you. So that's sort of our timeline. Hopefully we can do that. Obviously, every member should be, offering any kind of ideas we have. Roland, obviously, they're going to need if we can dig out the back schedules, the material that the previous two committees had to work on. So we're off and running on that. Which leads me to, while under new business, I'll need a motion to entertain a new item, and I'm going to call it the appointment of a new Lebanon Building Committee member.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we add an item to the agenda to appoint a member to the new Lebanon Building Committee.
I second that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So, as I said earlier, I really was caught a little bit off. I think we were in a budget committee, and Mr. Finger and I were talking about, well, we're not ready for putting someone on that yet, and that's not ready. And then all of a sudden, the town ordinance came out, Chapter 2, Article 9, Section 2-39 and 2-46, and it goes through the process, and I believe everybody's got a copy with that. I would say I've learned a lot about the building committee responses, and you'll hear a little bit in my chairman's report. We do get only one seat on this, but I'm going to, in my normal fashion, I'm going to move things a little bit. I am going to ask Mr. Drake to take this, but Mr. Raymer, I'm going to ask you to see if we can keep a double communication going. If Mr. Drake can't make a meeting, I want to make sure we have coverage. I know from Mrs. Tarkington's experience, this can be a huge commitment. So I just want to, I'm going to ask Mr. Drake to be the member on that, but I'm going to make sure we have somebody always ready to go kind of thing. I think that's just better.
I endorse the selection of Mr. Drake. Mr. Drake and I worked together. First of all, we worked together. We sent out emails in which we disagree with each other, but in fact, we worked together well through the feasibility. We were both on the feasibility committee, and I would be honored to be the understudy for Mr. Drake on the meetings that he's unable to attend.
I'd be pleased to work in that way with Jeff.
You know, what happened is when all of our building committees prior to this, I didn't make the choice, but I know with Ms. Tarkenton, if she can't make a meeting, can we get somebody to cover it? And that's a little bit awkward. So this time I'd rather have a plan. So I just figured I'd put that out there.
I'm not sure, to be perfectly candid, I mean, I'll attend, et cetera. I'm not sure there's actually a procedural basis for there to be a different BET member who stands in for the missing BET member on an assigned committee, which has been approved by the RTM. Each of the members are, in fact, approved by the RTM.
Correct.
So, you know, I don't know exactly what will be the legal standing, but there's nothing that prevents me from attending.
Correct.
As you've discovered, there's nothing that prevents me from speaking up from time to time, and I'll be glad to report back to this body what transpired at meetings that I attend.
No, but I'll give you an example.
The BET and the Board of Ed members are not approved by the RTM.
Yeah, we actually get the one seat. The Board of Ed gets one seat. The Board of Selectmen get a seat, and then the rest go out. But I'll give you an example. You miss a meeting. I mean, they're doing change orders. Ms. Tarkington can, Mr. Norton, you know, there's change orders going on. There's at almost every meeting. So it is involved.
But you know what the change orders are coming because there's an agenda item that indicates there are change orders. And normally on the three committees I have served, we knew what they were in advance.
There you go. So anyway, we'll move with that. Item 14, old business. I'm sorry, I don't have anything under old business.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Goldberg?
Under old business, Randy Huffman and I met with Haley Rockwell, the president of the library trustees. We had an excellent meeting. It was very positive. And subsequent to that, she met with the library director, and we heard back from her that they have concluded that now is the time to move forward with longer operating hours for the libraries. So they are going to begin formulating options for how they could implement these longer hours. It's going to take them some time, but we did hear back, and I want to thank you for your expressions of support for that and the other members who were likewise supportive of longer operating hours, and we should look forward to hearing what the options are.
Yes. I'm not 100% sure how the contract worked, but I would suspect they will go to Office of the Board of Selectmen. They'll run those ideas, and there's a process. It'll get back to us if they choose to do that. So obviously, there's an example. You know, obviously, we as a Board of Finance, we have certain leverages, but stuff like that really has to come from the originating appointing authority. They're in control. But I'm glad that we're doing that. Thank you for doing that. I always thought that was after one of the power outages, and Peter Tessie had asked the libraries to stay open because there was power outages everywhere. I thought the idea was brilliant then, and we're pursuing it, and that's the way we pursue it. So that was very good.
Super useful to the community.
Absolutely. Oh, yes, no doubt. BET minutes. As you saw, Mr. Drake, I'm going to call on Mr. Drake about our minutes.
You have before we have before us for approval tonight the BET minutes from our meeting of March 17th. But I apologize that you only received this afternoon the two additional sets of minutes, those of the public hearing that followed this March 17th BET meeting, and those of March 19th decision day. Since you just got those by email this afternoon, we don't propose to vote on them today. Sorry that they are tardy. But please provide your comments in due course. But we do have before us to approve the minutes that are in your package for the March 17th BET meeting.
So move.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? That is carried. Thank you, Mr. Drake. Mr. Drake, do you have anything?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Norton? I have three quick items. I think everybody will sort of I really appreciate, I did get some really terrific feedback for our visiting the committees and districts, which leads me into, there's an article going on about in the Greenwich Time about the RTM. It's a series of articles. I think they've had 2 of them already. You know, as I said in that article, the budget with the RTM, you can see it expanding. It's almost year-round. We're always talking to the RTM, whether it's on an interim or the budget. We've expanded our coverage. First of all, I just want to thank everybody. We do have May coming up. But that Greenwich Time article, you know, I heard it tonight 2 times with the odd funds. That was pretty good. We're gonna have to remember that.
Yeah, relabel that.
But the RTM, one of the things that I stress the importance is the boards and commissions and all these special groups that they approve. We're just talking about a building committee, and I thought that was something I highlighted. I don't know if anybody else got called by the media for that article or not, but it's a running article. It's pretty interesting. And the last thing is, I think everybody got an invite for Sunday, 10 a.m.
Yeah.
Now, originally that was supposed to be Thursday night, and it got moved. So Sunday at the Fire Training Center, I believe it is. So I think, you know, this is for all of us on this board. This is something we've been asking for, and they're doing it. We're making progress. This is a significant step. So I hope we are there. And Mr. Raymer, don't go near the fire hose. So with that, I will let it go. And again, thank you, everyone. Ms. Weissler?
Make a motion to adjourn?
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining?